Welcome to My View On, a series of podcasts where experts in the industry give their personal view on topics making waves in the media. Now, all views will be the expert's own, but provide a fresh look at issues that matter to the financial industry. I'm joined today by Alastair Conway, who's the Chief Executive at James Hay, to discuss his views on planning for retirement. Alastair, welcome.
Thank you.
So people often rail against what they see as the government's never-ending assault on pensions and the effect that tinkering is having. But given the real problem we have with people not saving enough, surely, how are we going to deal with the problem if the government doesn't do some of that tinkering?
Well, let's look at the most recent example of tinkering, which is the consultation paper around pension tax relief, which presents the concept that the complexity of tax treatment is the major barrier to people saving in a pension. I think that's fundamentally wrong. I mean, the number one barrier for most people is affordability. They're balancing long-term desire to build up a pot of money for their retirement against short-term requirements to pay the bills, keep a roof over their head, etc. I think some of the major barriers to people engaging in and thinking around retirement is going to be led by low confidence in the pension investment markets, constant changes to allowances, rules, fear that one government will come in and change all the things the last government put into place. And then finally, just the way we communicate from the financial services sector what we do and why it's good for people. My experience is once people have normally understood the challenge in front of them, they're very keen to engage and try and solve the problem in the best way they can. But if they don't get communicated in a way that's engaging in the first instance, you tend to find that they just don't engage at all.
I suppose part of the issue now is, though, that because of those changes introduced by government, we are all much more responsible for our own future pensions provision. The days of those gold-plated final salary schemes long since gone. Surely that is an impediment for people as well, the thought of that they have to take more responsibility.
Well, I think there's probably still a lack of understanding of people of the significance of those changes. Again, I think when most people have that explained to them, they recognise that they need to do something. So you've got a first barrier around them understanding what the challenge is, then the affordability piece. And then I think even if they've acknowledged that they've got something they need to do and they can afford it, they then look at the plethora of information they get presented with in an unhelpful way and reject it and go, that doesn't seem to sort of answer the question. So often the industry will talk about products, or we're talking about pensions in particular today, rather than turning around and saying, what need are you trying to satisfy? You're trying to reassure people they're going to be secure in their retirement. You're trying to reassure people they'll have enough money to live on and pay their bills and still go on holiday. That's the language they understand, the emotional connection they'll make to their later life years, rather than immediately what tends to happen is we get into a debate around products. Well, that's not very interesting. If you look at an example in other parts of the world in which we all live and look at something like smartphones and mobile technology, if Apple were to promote their product off the back of the complexity of how the phone works, we'd all turn off straight away. What's made that attractive for people and similar phones is because it's all in one place. It's easy to use. I can see the internet. I can do my text. I can make phone calls. It's got little icons and I just press the icon, because they've thought about how people want to engage with something and what it will do for them. And they describe those benefits, rather than, if you look at the adverts for those sort of products, it's about the benefits rather than going, here is the product and it's got this amount of memory and all those sort of things. Those days, that doesn't work. So why do we think when it comes to financial services products, something that people don't wake up in the morning wanting to talk about in the first instance, we think that somehow shoving product ideas or investment ideas at them straight away is going to resonate and unlock them into a conversation.
So perhaps a few more apps for the pensions industry or the like might convince us to take it more seriously, or at least engage more. Now, you talked there about barriers to understanding. How do we overcome those barriers then and challenge that perception?
Well, let's take a really simple example of pensions tax relief. If you were to stop somebody in the street today and say, would you like to get some free money from the government to put towards your retirement savings so that when you retire there's more in the pot? Most people would say yes. One or two might say, what's the catch, or be a bit cynical, but most would turn around and say, yes, please. If you stop those same people and say, would you do you think you'd enjoy getting or will benefit from having pension tax relief on your contributions into your pension? Most of them will look at you blankly and not really understand what you're talking about. So there's a good example of how we'll describe it will be the latter, whereas actually if you were to go down the former. Now, part of that challenge will come from the fact that we've got to make sure we communicate with people that's honest and open and is real. And the regulator tries to help with that, creating an environment. But we've got to strike a balance here of something that is factually correct, but actually is really easy for people to get their heads around. And that can't be beyond the wit of the financial service industry to start getting better at that.
So we're thinking about how you plan for retirement here. How would you then describe the benefits for that person you've stopped in the street? You've said to them, you can get some help from the government, some money from the government to help prepare for your retirement. But what are the benefits that we should be talking about when it comes to planning?
What you should be talking about is, if you end up building a pot of money at retirement and 20, 30, 40% of that could have been given to you through free money from the government, let's begin to express it in those terms in the first instance. Let's also make sure that we are talking in language that they can understand. So the moment you get into language like pension pots or ISA pots, etc., immediately you can see people blur in terms of their interest levels. Just talk about pots of money or draw out diagrams or something. We illustrate things rather than keep using words. A good example of that is if you take the word annuity today, most people will go, that's a bad thing. I don't like annuities. And that'll be because there were changes by the government a couple of years ago that allowed people not to have to buy an annuity anymore.
Probably plenty of people didn't even know what annuity was until they found out they didn't need to buy it anymore.
And they didn't know what it was and then decided they didn't like it, still not knowing what it really is. If you describe what an annuity does, i.e. if I give you a cheque for £1,000, you'll guarantee me an income for the rest of my life, whatever happens to me, however long I live. Most people go, I quite like that. But as soon as you say, would you like an annuity, and then describe it, they say they don't want it. So that shows you the importance of language and how information is presented to how people receive it and then how accepting they are of the principles. And therefore, it's back to describing things very clearly, making it relate to what their need is and what problem they're trying to solve and how it relates to their financial circumstances, and breaking away from the jargon and throwing product names and government legislation and rules at them, but rather giving them explanations that they can relate to and immediately adopt and accept.
So do you think, Alastair, final thought, do you think eventually it comes down to that, the use of language, the way that we communicate with
I don't think we can underestimate the importance of how we communicate and explain these concepts to people. If I go back to days when I used to advise, which is some time ago now, but I don't think the principles have changed, you'd be staggered how drawing some pots and some diagrams in front of somebody brings something alive that they can read books and books on and still not understand. So I think it's essential we get the language. In the long term, we need to get the level of education about financial services up, but that will take time. So maybe the generation going through education will adopt that more readily now, but we've got to educate the whole of the UK economy in terms of financial services generally. But in the meanwhile, let's get the communication right and better, because that's something we can do quickly. And the two combined, I think, in the long term, are hope that we will end up with a better set of solutions than we have today.
Okay, Alastair, good to talk to you again. Thanks very much indeed.
Thank you.
And you can find out more about James Hay and about our topical podcasts by going to jameshay.co.uk.